The Rover P6 was 20 years ahead of its time, and almost nobody noticed what made it special. When it appeared in 1963, this restrained four-door saloon had body panels that could be unbolted, a passenger compartment designed around crash survival, suspension engineered to leave space for a gas turbine, and four-wheel disc brakes. 5 years later, Rover fitted a lightweight aluminium V8 and created one of Britain's most convincing executive express trains. It won the first European Car of the Year award. More than 320,000 examples were built. So how did one of Britain's cleverest cars become a footnote? Solihull, 1957. Rover was known for solid, respectable cars that looked entirely at home outside a bank, a country hotel, or a government office. The upright Rover P4 had earned the nickname Auntie because it felt dependable, dignified, and slightly disapproving. It was a fine reputation, but it was not the reputation of a company about to reinvent the sports saloon. Behind the conservative grille, Rover's engineers were thinking about jet power. The company had worked on gas turbines during and after the Second World War. By the 1950s, engineers including Spen King and Gordon Bashford genuinely believed a turbine-powered road car might become practical. Rover built experimental machines such as Jet 1 and the T3, then started planning a new production saloon that could accept either a normal piston engine or a turbine in the future. That requirement shaped almost everything. Stylist David Batch gave the new car a low roof, a wide stance, and crisp flanks. It still looked respectable, but it no longer looked elderly. Underneath, the engineering team abandoned Rover's old habits and started with a blank sheet. The project was called P6. The production car would be called the Rover 2000. Its strangest idea was also the easiest to miss. On a conventional monocoque car, the visible body and the load-bearing structure are largely one welded shell. Damage a wing, a sill, or a complicated body section, and the repair can become structural, expensive, and difficult to align. The Rover used a different approach. At its center was a welded steel base unit. This carried the suspension, engine, doors, seats, and major loads. The exterior skin, including the wings and other visible panels, was attached around it. Those outer panels did not hold the car together. They could be removed, painted separately, replaced after damage, or adjusted without rebuilding the central structure. Picture a black steel skeleton moving through the Solihull factory, complete enough to accept its mechanical parts before the finished exterior panels were bolted into place. Rover used jigs to drill the mounting points accurately, helping panels line up from one car to the next. Today, modular construction and replaceable exterior sections sound completely normal. In the early 1960s, this was an unusually systematic way to build a British luxury car. There was one catch. The visible panels could look beautiful while corrosion attacked the hidden base unit underneath. For modern restorers, that means a shiny wing tells you almost nothing about the health of the actual car. The same idea that made accident repair easier can make rust harder to spot, and that was not even the cleverest piece of engineering. Look inside the front wheel arch of a Rover P6 and the suspension seems to have been designed by somebody who refused to put anything where it normally belonged. The coil springs do not stand vertically beside the engine. They lie horizontally, pointing toward the passenger compartment. Wheel movement is transferred through an upper link and a bell crank, pushing the spring against the strong bulkhead at the rear of the engine bay. Why go to all that trouble? Because conventional spring towers would have narrowed the engine compartment. Rover wanted a wide, unobstructed space for that future gas turbine. The turbine never reached production, but the unusual suspension remained. It also gave the P6 excellent wheel control and helped keep major suspension loads away from weaker outer sheet metal. The long travel springs and careful geometry contributed to the car's combination of ride comfort and cornering ability, a balance that many saloons still struggled to achieve. At the rear, Rover used a Dion arrangement. The differential was fixed to the body instead of bouncing with the wheels, reducing unsprung weight. A tube linked the rear hubs so the wheels maintained a stable relationship to the road, and Rover added a telescoping section to avoid the binding that could occur with sliding drive shaft splines. Then there were the brakes. The Rover 2000 had servo-assisted discs on all four wheels. The rear discs sat beside the differential rather than out at the hubs, again reducing unsprung weight. Servicing them was not fun, and heat around the differential could create problems, but the layout showed how seriously Rover treated road behavior. This was not technology added for a brochure headline. The suspension, steering, brakes, and structure were designed as one system. That is the detail people missed at the time. The P6 did not have one futuristic gimmick. The entire car had been thought through. Safety received the same treatment. In the early 1960s, many cars were still designed mainly to survive rough roads, not to protect the people inside a major collision. A strong body was considered enough, even if that strength transferred violent forces directly into the cabin. Rover took a more modern view. The P6 used a rigid central passenger structure with deformable zones at the front and rear. In a severe frontal impact, the engine and surrounding structure were intended to move away from the occupants, rather than simply invade the cabin. The steering arrangement was short and positioned to reduce the risk of a long column being driven straight toward the driver. Inside, the dashboard used padded and deformable surfaces. Areas around the driver's knees were treated as part of the protection system rather than decorative furniture. The fuel tank was mounted within the main structure and separated from the passenger compartment by a steel bulkhead. Even small details showed the same mindset. Plastic prisms on top of the front side lights allowed the driver to see the corners of the car at night and confirm that the lamps were working. Warning systems monitored items such as brake fluid and pad wear on some versions. The controls were grouped logically, the ventilation system was unusually comprehensive, and the seats were shaped around support rather than simply filled with soft padding. None of this makes a P6 equal to a modern crash-tested saloon. It does show that Rover was asking modern safety questions before regulations forced the entire industry to ask them. The company did not merely claim the car was safe. Rover filmed dramatic crash tests and promoted the P6 as engineered for protection. In 1964, the Rover 2000 became the first winner of the European Car of the Year award, beating the Mercedes-Benz 600. That result sounds almost absurd today. A 2-liter Rover saloon defeating one of the most extravagant Mercedes cars ever made. But the judges were not rewarding glamour. They were rewarding the complete idea. The original Rover 2000 used a 1.98-liter four-cylinder engine with an overhead camshaft. It was compact, economical by Rover standards, and technically ambitious. The combustion chambers were formed partly in the piston crowns, and aluminium was used where it could save weight. The engine was not perfect. Some drivers found it coarse when pushed, and the earliest single carburetor version did not have the effortless performance suggested by the chassis. Rover answered with the twin carburetor 2000 TC, which gave the car more urgency and helped define a new kind of machine. It was smaller and more economical than a traditional luxury saloon, but more sophisticated and prestigious than an ordinary family car. In other words, Rover had created the compact executive sports saloon before the phrase had settled into the market. BMW understood that market extremely well. Rover showed that Britain could compete on the same ground, yet the P6's finest surprise began thousands of miles from Solihull with an American engine that General Motors had already abandoned. The Buick 215 was a compact V8 made largely from aluminium. It had been developed for small American cars, but it was expensive to manufacture and had suffered from production and service issues in its original form. Buick moved on. Rover managing director William Martin Hurst encountered the engine during a trip to the United States in the mid-1960s. He recognized something remarkable. Despite having twice as many cylinders as the Rover 4, the Buick V8 was compact and extraordinarily light. An imported engine was brought back to Britain and installed in a P6 prototype. The result changed the future of Rover. The wide engine bay created for the never-used gas turbine now had exactly the space needed for the V8. Because the aluminium engine weighed little more than the four-cylinder unit, it did not ruin the car's balance. Rover bought the manufacturing rights and tooling, then re-engineered the design for British production and the smoother, more durable character its customers expected. A failed American engine program and an abandoned British turbine dream had accidentally found each other. That sounds like luck. Recognizing the opportunity was engineering judgment. The Rover 3005 arrived in 1968. At first, it came only only with a 3-speed automatic gearbox because the existing manual transmission could not comfortably handle the V8's torque. A contemporary road test recorded a top speed of about 117 miles per hour and 0 to 60 in roughly 9.5 seconds. Those numbers made the 3005 a serious performance saloon, but the experience mattered more than the stopwatch. The V8 delivered quiet thrust without demanding high revs. The car could leave a city in dignified silence, gather speed on an open motorway, and arrive at a country house looking as if nothing dramatic had happened. The later 3005S added a strengthened 4-speed manual gearbox. The letter S referred to synchromesh, although drivers were happy to treat it as meaning sport. Now the P6 had two distinct personalities. The 4-cylinder 2000 and later 2200 models carried the pure engineering idea. Their lighter engines gave them sharp balance and a more energetic character. The 3005 turned the same structure into a compact Grand Tourer. Its Rover V8 would go on to power Range Rovers, Land Rovers, sports cars, racing machines, and generations of British specials. The engine became more famous than the saloon that first showed how effective it could be in a smaller Rover. If you enjoy forgotten cars that changed the industry, subscribe. There are plenty more British machines whose best ideas survived after their badges disappeared. By 1968, the P6 had entered a very different company. Rover had been absorbed into Leyland, and Leyland then merged with British Motor Holdings to form British Leyland. The new group contained Rover, Triumph, Jaguar, Austin, Morris, MG, and a maze of factories and suppliers. On paper, it looked like a British automotive superpower. In practice, it created overlapping models, internal rivalries, slow decisions, fragile finances, labor disputes, and constant pressure to reduce costs. Rover was no longer a focused company spending Land Rover profits on one obsessively engineered saloon. It was one division inside a giant organization trying to keep dozens of product lines alive. For a while, the P6 continued to sell and evolve. The Series 2 facelift arrived around 1970, and the 4-cylinder range grew into the 2200, but the original car was aging, investment was limited, and assembly quality became increasingly inconsistent. This is where the story takes a turn nobody expected. The base unit concept depended on precision. Bolted panels are only an advantage when the holes, seals, doors, paint, wiring, and trim are fitted correctly. A sophisticated suspension is only impressive when every component is assembled and maintained to the right standard. Under pressure, the P6 could become the opposite of what its designers intended. Water leaks, electrical faults, corrosion, poor panel fit, and mechanical failures damaged the experience of later cars. One notorious Rover 3005 bought in 1974 became a symbol of the problem. During its first 6,000 miles, it reportedly went through 3 engines, 2 gearboxes, 2 clutch housings, and a complete replacement wiring loom. It spent 114 of its first 165 days in a workshop. That was one extreme car, not every P6. Plenty of late examples gave loyal service, and survivors today prove the underlying design was far better than the reputation British Leyland created around it. But reputations are rarely built from averages. They are built from stories people repeat. A Rover that wins Car of the Year becomes a proud line in a history book. A nearly new Rover consuming 3 engines becomes a national joke. So yeah, not great. The same organization was preparing the P6's replacement, the Rover SD1. The new car looked dramatic, carried the V8 proudly, and won European Car of the Year for 1977. But underneath, it used more conventional engineering, including a live rear axle and rear drum brakes. That was not automatically bad engineering. Simpler systems can be lighter, cheaper, and easier to manufacture. The problem was what the change represented. Rover's future would no longer be built around the P6 philosophy of spending heavily on hidden sophistication. British Leyland needed cars it could produce at scale, with fewer expensive components. The same ideas that made the P6 special also made it difficult to repeat inside a company fighting for survival. This is where Britain began to forget it. The Mini was unforgettable because its shape became a symbol of the 1960s. The Jaguar E-Type was unforgettable because it looked like speed standing still. The Range Rover became a category of its own and carried Rover engineering into a new age. The P6 looked like a well-dressed accountant. Its cleverest features were under the skin, behind the dashboard, beside the differential, or hidden inside the base unit. You could not explain its importance with one glamorous famous photograph. German manufacturers had a different advantage. BMW turned the compact sporting saloon into a consistent family of cars, then improved the formula generation after generation. Mercedes-Benz and Audi built clear identities around engineering, quality, and continuity. Rover had already shown the ingredients: a manageable footprint, serious road manners, restrained luxury, strong performance, and engineering that made the driver feel looked after. But British Leyland did not turn the P6 into a stable dynasty. It replaced it, reorganized the company again, fought another crisis, and allowed the Rover passenger car identity to change repeatedly. The P6 became an isolated achievement instead of the first chapter in an obvious bloodline. Pay attention to that detail, because it explains everything. Cars are remembered through repetition. Porsche kept refining the 911. BMW kept refining the 3 Series and 5 Series. Mercedes kept rebuilding the idea of the engineered executive saloon. Each new generation reminded buyers why the old ones mattered. The P6 had no such campaign working on its behalf. Later Rover cars borrowed pieces of its character, and the Rover 75 even echoed some of its visual details. The P6's engineering also influenced the Range Rover, which was developed by many of the same minds and shared ideas about body construction, ride comfort, braking, and interior function. But the original saloon itself slipped between categories. It was too restrained to become a poster car, too complex to become cheap transport, too successful to be remembered as a heroic failure, and too connected to British Leyland to escape the shadow of everything that followed. That may be the cruelest part of the story. Britain did not forget the Rover P6 because it failed. Britain forgot it because its success was not protected. More than 320,000 cars proved there was a market. The V8 proved the structure had room to grow. The Safety Awards and European Car of the Year title proved the industry understood what Rover had achieved. But engineering brilliance needs continuity, manufacturing discipline, and a company healthy enough to tell the same story for decades. The Rover P6 had the brilliance. British Leyland lost the rest. Today, a surviving P6 still reveals its character slowly. Open a door and the cabin feels architectural rather than decorative. Look beneath the rear and the inboard discs sit beside the differential. Follow the front suspension and the horizontal springs disappear toward the bulkhead. Remove an outer panel and the black base unit shows how the whole car was conceived. Then start a 3005 and the aluminium V8 adds the final contradiction. A formal British saloon suddenly sounds like something far less sensible. The P6's legacy is not one invention or one award. It is the complete idea of a car designed from structure to safety, from suspension to servicing, with every system connected. That idea did survive. It survived in the compact executive saloons that filled European motorways. It survived in crash structures and modular body repair. It survived in the Range Rover. It survived in the Rover V8, long after the P6 production line stopped in 1977. The badge faded, but the thinking did not. The next time you see a Rover P6 parked quietly at a classic car show, look past the wood trim and the respectable grille. You are looking at the future, wearing a bowler hat.